Okay. So now, at the point of being in ICU or whatever have you, if the person does not have insurance, you need to ask for, they have special people in the hospital to help you either apply for insurance immediately, and they can back the insurance up from the day the accident happens. Like Carl was, he was airlifted to the hospital, and that was on May 31st. But the lady screwed up somewhere, and because he didn't end up in the hospital or was put in the books as Carl Hussey, because at first he was put as Nathan Doe or whatever, and his name wasn't changed till the next day. The insurance didn't pay. They didn't start paying until June 1st. Um, because she backtracked it. She automatically had us, and I didn't ask for this. They automatically came to me. So if they don't automatically come to you to fill out this paperwork and do all this, and it does take a long time. Because a lot of times you don't know the answers, and you have to figure it out. Um, anyway, they can backtrack it, but they didn't have his name into the hospital, or she didn't do it until June 1st. And so his ambulance that first showed up, and then the airlife, they didn't get paid for. So you need to make sure they have the right date. And if they don't, you end up paying for that stuff. And we did. We ended up paying for that stuff, and I can't tell you how long it took us. Just a long time. I'm sorry, I'm a little sweaty. I was outside watering plants and stuff. Um, but make sure you get that done. And the only thing I could tell you that's extremely important is ask questions. Like Carl was put in drug induced coma because he had the traumatic brain injuries of the frontal and temporal lobe. They put him in drug induced coma because they didn't want his brain working. They wanted it to rest. And so they put him in drug induced coma, and they called it the Michael Jackson juice because that's actually what killed Michael Jackson. Um, they used to put that to give him that so he could sleep, and that's actually what killed him. Um, but they had Carl on that along with other medications, and I didn't know what these medications were, and I should have known to ask because my mother uh, was given. I forget the name of the medication. I'm sure I'll remember it later. But it actually caused her to have a heart attack. And later on, I found out Carl was on it, and I had to tell them, take it off, because it might be hereditary. You don't know, so you just have to be extremely cautious. And they did take it off. They took him off of that, and put him on something else. There's always an alternative. There's always another thing they can put you on. So anyway, they had him in drug-induced coma for, I want to say, 2 weeks. His 2 weeks, his eyes closed. He just looks dead, and he's just. It was horrible. So after the 2 weeks, they took him off the medication to keep him in coma, in a coma, and that's when they took me and my husband into a room and told us his kidneys are failing, his liver is failing, um, everything was failing. And I said, "What about his heart?" Um, and they said, oddly enough, his heart has not missed a beat. His lungs were failing. He wasn't breathing on his own. That's the tubes that he had in his throat. Um, and his heart was still going. I said, and then they said something about going brain dead. He could be going brain dead. And at that point, I'm just like, could be? You don't know? And this is a rule that I live by. Doctors know everything there is to know about the brain except for how it works. Please remember that. They don't know how it works. They know sections, they know parts, they know this, they know that, but they don't know how it actually functions. Okay? So please remember that. But they told us he was going brain dead. They didn't say he was brain dead. They didn't say he was partially brain dead. They couldn't tell me. And so they wanted me to allow them to let him die. And I said, look, his heart's still going. You can't tell me how much brain damage he has, if any. All you can tell me is he has traumatic brain injury. And that could be, I mean, I see people who have had traumatic brain injury, never had their skull taken out. They're walking around doing everything. So it didn't mean anything to me that they were saying he was going brain dead. Okay, now at this same time, this congresswoman, Gabby something or another, she had gotten shot. And when she got shot here, and it hit her frontal lobe and her temporal lobe. But the thing is, it came out in the back. And when it did, it exploded her skull. So it allowed the brain to automatically start swelling without pressure on it, automatically. And so she had the same injuries as Carl. But in less than a week, she was talking and she was doing therapy and she was moving around. She was doing everything. And so, you know, to me, them telling me he's partially brain dead or he could be going brain dead, it didn't mean anything to me. And so I told him, no, you're not going to let him die. As long as that heart keeps beating and he keeps moving around, you are going to keep going. Don't stop. You don't know. So unless you can tell me indefinitely, you don't know what kind of brain injury he has, what part of the brain is really hurting, if any of it's dead. So I told them, you keep going. Okay, so they did, and they said, well, the only thing that we can do now is to cut open his stomach, and I'm talking from right above the belly button um, all the way down to, I guess, his pubic hairline, and open it up, put like fake skin on it so it can swell, and it'll relieve pressure off the pressure of the intestines and everything off of the diaphragm, and that might work. We don't know. And I'm like, well, if it's that simple, do it. Just do it. And they did it. And by the time they got him back into the room, all of his stats were improving. And I felt like it was improving a bunch. But the general surgeon that did the surgery, he came in, and for the first time, he had a little grin on his face. For the first time, because he always looked mad. He always, horrible bedside manner, but I find those tend to be the best doctors. But for the first time, he walked in and he glanced at me and he had a little grin on his face. And this just so happened to be Carl's birthday. And so he said, little steps, baby steps. And I was like, this is a big one. This is a big one. If this is improving the stats that much, then that means everything else can start working. And they did. His liver started functioning properly. Everything started functioning properly except for his kidneys. The kidneys wouldn't work, so they put him on dialysis, which broke my heart. He had to do it twice a week. Dialysis twice a week. And when he was in ICU, they would do it there. But then when they moved him to a regular room, they had to take him to the dialysis room, which killed me because they wouldn't let me in there because there was other patients in there also. When we were in ICU, they had visiting hours, and I couldn't take that. I just couldn't take it. So I talked to the I don't know what you call it, the head of the floor, the administrator of the floor, or whatever. And bless her heart, her name was Susan Gerhardt, or it still is, and I believe she's still there. And I asked to talk to her, and so I got to talk to her, and I asked her, can I just ignore these rules and be with my son? Because they kept telling me he was going to die, and I wanted to be there if he was going to die. And so she asked me his name, and she looked it up on the computer, and she said, he's a very sick boy. And I said, that's why I want to be with him. And she gave me permission. And so the door at the ICU, the doors were always locked. You always had to push a button. They'd ask who you were going to see, and they'd let you in if it was visiting hours. But at that point, I was allowed to go in and out as I pleased, because I wanted to make sure I was there if he died. But lo and behold, he did not die. We were in the ICU, and I was leaning over his bed, sleeping, or trying to sleep, resting, sitting in a chair, just leaning over his bed. And the nurse, his name was Albert at the time, uh, they always look in the eyes, no reaction, no reaction. And I heard that so many times. And I've just gotten to where, I just, when a nurse comes in, or because they were coming in and out constantly, I would just lay there and rest my head and hold Carl's hand and talk to him every so often, telling him, you don't go out like this. This is not the way you wanted to die. You didn't want to die on a motorcycle. You wanted to die in a race car, because, he loved Jeff Gordon at the time, and he wanted to die in a race car. And so I kept telling him, you have to stay with us. You've got to do that. And, I'm laying there resting, and Albert came in, and he looked at his eye. He said, mild reaction. And I looked up, and he said, just a little bit. And then he went to the other eye, and he said, I see a reaction. And I sat up, and that was good news. That was such good news, because that obviously meant the brain was working. The brain is working, so he's not brain dead. He might be partially damaged in there, but he wasn't brain dead. So that told me that boy could hear me and do what I was telling him to do, fight and fight and fight. And so he did. He fought. And once they realized he was going to live, against what everybody thought, the neurosurgeon, he was just so sure Carl was going to die. And anyway, we got transferred to a regular floor, surgical floor, and they had him in a room with with 3 other people. And I cried, because I knew this was not going to work. One nurse to take care of 4 people when Carl needed round the clock, care, because I saw it in the ICU. If his nurse was not in there, somebody else was. He was constantly, his IVs, his, medication, needing suctioning from his trach. Suctioning because, at the time he's out of it, he's not swallowing, he's choking on, all kinds of stuff, and he needed constant suction. So I knew that wasn't going to work. And at that floor, they would not let me come and go as I wanted. I had to be there during visiting hours only. And I came in the next morning, and I was there waiting for them to open the doors. And as soon as they did, I went to Carl's room, and there was a group of people all around him. And Elaine, the one that was in the picture, I heard her say, Carl, you are not going to die today. And she was suctioning all kinds of stuff out of him. I knew that was going to happen. I knew it. And they finally moved him into a room that had glass all around it, so that they could see him at all times. And he was by himself in that room, and I felt so much better knowing that they could see him, and that the nurses, anytime they see him choke or anything, they could take care of him. And I felt so much better at that point. When you're concerned about that, and this is something Susan Gerhardt had talked to me about. They had written a paper about me. I might show it to you sometime, I don't know. That the nurses from the ICU need to get with the nurses that's going to take care of him on the floor that's being moved. They need to talk to each other. They don't need to read each other's notes, because that's not good enough. There's things they leave out. There's things that just don't get put in there, because the only thing they put in there is what is necessary. They don't put in, Carl needs a lot of suctioning. Carl needs this. Carl needs that. You need to keep an eye on him. He does this. He does that. They don't put all that in there. They just put what's medically necessary for the next person. So when they get moved from floor to floor, those nurses need to talk to each other. And if they haven't, you need to ask them, have you talked to the nurse that was on ICU that was taking care of him? And if they haven't, you tell them, please do so. Please do so. It needs to be done. So that they just know all the particulars. They have to know all the particulars. So Carl got moved into his room by himself, and I was so much happier with that. And at that point, I got to know all the nurses, and there was a nurse on that floor. Her name was Jennifer Lopez. And we all called her J-Lo, or they did. And so then I started calling her J-Lo. And this woman, bless her soul, I knew all the nurses, and all of them were great. They were great. But with Jennifer, anytime I was in that room when she came in, Anything she did, I had to know how to do. And if I didn't, she would teach me. And she was the most patient person in the world. She taught me everything. Everything. Because we had the intention to take him home. We weren't going to send him to a nursing home. I won't do that to my child. I won't do that to my child. And during all this time, I had heard about all these miracles, somebody just waking up and saying, well, I'm ready to go home, or I'm hungry, or what happened. And so I just kept thinking to myself every day, that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. He's just going to sit up one day and say, what's going on? So I had intended to take him home. Me and his father both, we're taking him home. And the caseworker on that floor had come in and she said, which nursing home is he going to? And we said, no, we're taking him home. And she said, well, you can't. And I'm like, why not? She goes, well, you don't have a way to transfer him to and from the doctor's appointments. You don't have, the facilities you need in your house. You don't have the know-how. He needs round the clock care and you can't do that. And so the next day my husband had gone and visited a couple of nursing homes, and we went home that night and he was telling me about some of the nursing homes, or two of them, and they were real expensive, but he had his insurance now, and so we weren't too worried about the cost. And so when I got there the next day, waiting to get in the door, one of the nurses saw me and she let me in. She said, Nina, come on. And so I went ahead and I went, and I was just walking to Carl's room. And by the time I got to Carl's room, I had like 4 or 5 nurses behind me, and I turned around and I was like, what? What's the matter? And I had like 3 nurses say something all at the same time. One of them said, I thought you were taking him home. And I said, well, we were told we couldn't. And they said, by who? And I told her, well, I don't know her name, but the caseworker that came in to ask us, more which nursing home he was going to. We told her, excuse me, that we wanted to take him home, and she said we couldn't. And proceeded to tell her what else she had said. And 3 nurses disappeared. 2 more stayed. 2 more had stayed and talked to me and said, we'll teach you how to take care of him. You can keep him home. You can take him home. And I was like, good. I want to go home. I want to take him home. So they're like, okay, we'll teach you and we'll figure out everything else later. And so that was all situated right there. Okay, and I'm done for today. It's been 18 minutes. Wow. Okay, so I got to get ready to get Carl out of bed and get him in his chair so he can be happy in the living room with everybody else. Okay, and I will see you soon. Bye.